Gaddafi in hiding calls on Libyan tribes to fight on and purify the country from what he describes as foreign agents. But will tribal leaders heed this call? And how will Libya's tribes decide the country's future? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Jane Dutton. They are armed and will not surrender. That is the warning from Libya's embattled leader as he spoke about the tribes loyal to him. Rebel fighters extended their deadline for Gaddafi loyalists to lay down their arms by another week. But any hopes of a peaceful takeover of Gaddafi's hometown of Sirte came to an abrupt end as he urged his supporters to keep fighting.
Our resistance is mounting day by day. Prepare yourselves for a long guerrilla war and fight and resist occupation. We need to kill the army of the enemy, whether they are foreigners or Libyans.
So which tribes are loyal to Gaddafi and how powerful are they? Of the 140 tribes in Libya, only a few are considered politically significant. Muammar Gaddafi is from the Gaddafi tribe, concentrated in Sirte. It's small, but its members held many prominent political and military positions under his regime. When Gaddafi came to power, he built an alliance with the Wafala tribe. It is Libya's largest and is centered in Bani Walid. But many of the tribe's 1 million members are believed to have broken with Gaddafi since the uprising began. The Zawaya tribe is spread out over a large area in the east, making it a considerable force. It's a big oil-producing area, and so the tribe may demand guarantees in the use of oil revenues. Will Gaddafi's call make a difference to these tribesmen? To discuss this further, I'm joined by guests. In Benghazi, Faraj Najem, historian and author of Tribes, Islam and State in Libya. In Springfield in the US, Benjamin Barber, distinguished fellow at the Policy Center Demos and author of Jihad versus McWorld. Barber is a former member of the governing board of the Gaddafi Foundation. And in UK, in Oxford, is Oliver Miles, who is the former UK ambassador to Libya. Welcome, gentlemen. Mr. Barber, let's start off with you. You know Gaddafi, you know his family very well. Is this a last desperate attempt for support, or can he really rely on the tribes?
I think both things are true. It is a last desperate attempt, but I think with or without Gaddafi, there will be members of his tribe, of the Wafalas and others who have a deep vested interest in his rule and in the continued position of Tripoli in Libya. And as a result, I think we could see, even if Gaddafi is captured or killed, I think we could see the possibility of an insurgency, a counterinsurgency that would look like Iraq in the early days and would lead to ongoing counterinsurgency and, in effect, terrorist strikes from supporters of Gaddafi.
Mr. Miles, as ambassador, obviously you had several experiences with Gaddafi and the men around him. Does he have any leverage at the moment with these tribes?
It's very difficult to read from outside, and of course we're in untried territory because for more than a generation Libya has been run by one man, by Gaddafi, and don't forget that for 2 generations before that it was run by one man, Mussolini, and both of them, I think, set up about systematically weakening the tribes politically. So I personally think the sort of estimates you've been given and the statement by Professor Barber gives an exaggerated picture. I have not myself been able to detect that the tribes are likely to exert that degree of political influence in Libya now.
Mr. Najem, what do you make? I mean, which gentleman do you think is right here? You've studied tribes. How much influence do they have, and how much can Gaddafi still rely on them?
Well, I have to go along with my friend Oliver. I don't think the tribes right now bear any significance in the politics of Libya post-Gaddafi or Libya during this revolution. I don't think Gaddafi can amount any tribal attempt to recover his authority in Tripoli. I think the man is lost, he's desperate, and I don't think he can make it.
But he's still got supporters, hasn't he? I mean, there must still be tribesmen who support him. He's paid so much money to so many tribes in the past from oil and gas. He must be getting some kind of support.
Well, if you want me to go into details, I think Gaddafi has lost his tribal base in Libya. The nearest is his own tribe, the Gaddafi tribe. They are minority in numbers. They let him down. The most prominent figure is Al-Barrani Ishkal, who was the head of his security brigade, who has been in communication with the NTC since May, and also other Gaddafi tribesmen who have let him down, let alone Warfella, who has by and large let Gaddafi down by not aligning themselves with him. You remember a few months ago he was urging them to move against Misrata. They didn't. He tried Tarhuna. They didn't. Now he is hijacking Warfella, and he's believed to be, well, his son Saif. I was in the operation room of Warfella revolutionaries, and they were telling me that Saif, he's hiding in Bani Walid, and he's with his thugs are hijacking the whole town, and also the Warfella, who constitute only 60,000 of them in Bani Walid. So I didn't think he has any support. I think he's a desperate man.
What do you make of that, Mr. Barber?
Well, I think the focus on Gaddafi and Saif and his sons and Khamis and Mohammed is misplaced, because way before there was a Gaddafi and a rule of the Gaddafis, there has been for hundreds of years, literally, a rivalry between Benghazi and Tripoli, between Cyrenaica and Tripolitania. The monarchy and the flags they're using, the rebels are using, are actually monarchist flags from the 50s and 60s, came out of Benghazi. The Gaddafis came out of, obviously, Sirte and Tripoli. And that conflict, I think, is going to continue with or out. It depends on the alternative. If we have a genuine national unity, then maybe the tribal differences can be overcome. But if, as we are already seeing, there's rivalry about who gets the money, who will be the military commanders. I have a question for my friend in Benghazi. The murder just a month ago of Yunus Obaidi suggested real rivalries happening inside the insurgency, which have not yet been fully answered. More recently, we have seen that Mr. Belhaj, who has been the head from the west of the military forces that occupied Tripoli, has been contested by some of the people in the east in Benghazi. If, as we go forward, even without Gaddafis, we don't really have a united Libyan citizenry, then the danger is that right now what are relatively mellow forces will become more rival, more angry at one another, and there will then be, I think, the danger of a real fracturing of Libya, which has never truly had unity.
Mr. Najm, maybe you can answer that. Do you think the country will be run by tribes or militias?
Well, I think my friend in America, he's out of touch. He has misread the whole situation in Libya. There is no rivalry here at all between East and West. There is no tribal conflict at all. And Gaddafi, he's not really well entrenched, and we saw this. I mean, only before the liberation of Tripoli, people were saying that this is going to take a hell of an effort to do this, and there would be too much blood. But this was done within 24 hours, and mostly done by Tripolitanians who welcomed everyone else who came from outside. I've never sensed a great sense of unity amongst Libya than now. Libyans, they feel so related to each other. Easterners or Cyrenaicans, whom my friend called rivals to Tripolitanians, they're the ones who said that Libya will not be complete, will not be one unit unless Tripoli is liberated and remains the capital forever. I think there is a great sense of unity amongst Libyans. Gaddafi, if he's done something good, he has really rallied all Libyans against him. And this is great, and we must be grateful to him for rallying Libyans to stand against his rule.
Let me read you this quote, which supports what you say. A brigade of the Warfella tribe is preparing to do battle in Bani Walid. You were touching on that a little bit earlier. That's a Gaddafi stronghold, which is also made up of the same tribe. When asked how they feel about engaging in a battle, basically with their own people, the brigadesman replied, during Gaddafi's time, tribes were important, but now tribalism is dead in Libya. It's no longer relevant because Libya is all one tribe. Mr. Miles, I know that you were trying to say something. Do you agree with that?
I think I stick to my position that the importance of the tribal element is very much exaggerated, and perhaps it's been exaggerated by Gaddafi's propaganda or by critics of NATO's action in Libya, or I don't know where the criticism is coming from. But I don't underrate the difficulties. Of course, the Transitional National Council face enormous difficulties in putting the country together again, or in building up a new Libya. I don't think personally that the split between Benghazi and Tripoli is anything like as serious as Professor Barber was suggesting. Incidentally, I think the king really centered his authority and power in Al-Bayda rather than in Benghazi, but that's a detail. I think that all the Libyans that I'm aware of, actually, whether they support Gaddafi or not, have spoken of the need to maintain Libya as one.
But there really is a, sorry, excuse me, jumping in here. There really is a difference, isn't there, between Benghazi, the rebel stronghold, and Tripoli. And it makes you wonder if the supporters within, the Gaddafi supporters within Tripoli, whoever they may be, will be able to take orders from Benghazi.
I think you're exaggerating that. It's true that Tripoli in some respects is different from the rest of Libya. There are more people in Tripoli who are not tribesmen, who don't consider themselves to be tribesmen. But that's not a difference between Tripoli and Benghazi. That's a difference between Tripoli and most of the other areas of the country.
Okay, Mr. Barber, you try to interject. What did you have to say?
Well, again, let me just repeat my questions, because I understand the need for goodwill and optimism. And at the same time, I don't want that optimism to come at the cost of realism about the challenges that lay ahead. We've seen again and again that strong men can unify a country in getting them removed, but once they're removed, the people who were unified in removing them fall apart as they become rivals for money, for oil, and for power. And my fear is if we don't at least recognize the potential for that, then the possibilities of a unified Libya will become much more difficult. I want to repeat, though, for my friends here, the questions I've asked. I mean, Yunus Obaidi was murdered a month ago, never settled. Nobody's really explained what happened. We see now one of the Islamic Fighting Front warriors released from prison actually by Saif Gaddafi over a year ago, has now been in charge of the Western militias that took Tripoli. That's Mr. Belshab. I've seen comments from other members of the Transitional Council suggesting some suspicion about his motives, his background in the Islamic fighting group. And again, let's redress these things rather than just saying cliches about national unity. I mean, I appreciate that there in Benghazi there's a real need to try to unify the country and say positive things. But without realism about the challenges, there will be a real danger that as the Gaddafis disappear and the rivalries increase, that things will fall apart in a very dangerous way.
Mr. Najim, do you think the NTC is capable of resolving that issue that's been raised by Mr. Barber?
Well, I don't think these two issues that Mr. Barber has raised have anything to do with the tribes and tribalism of Libya right now. But anyway, the assassination of the late Abdel Fattah Yunus, it's been investigated, and this was addressed by Mahmoud Jibril, who is the interim Prime Minister of Libya, and he said the investigation conclusion will be put forward and in a very transparent fashion, and we're still
because
waiting for this.
Because his tribes members are threatening retaliation if they don't
out.
get answers, and if they don't get answers soon.
No, I've spoken to so many of them. They said, look, they said that we fought and we stood for Libya, not for Abdel Fattah Yunus. Abdel Fattah Yunus has gone, sad as it is, but Libya remains. And this, they made it very clear. And they were applauded for this. As for Abdel Hakim Bilhaj, this man, he's irrespective of his background, he has written and he has reformed himself. He has behaved immaculately, and he has decided to join in to liberate his country, and we cannot exclude him as long as he behaves in the fashion that we expect him to behave. And that's what's happening. Libya is going to be transparent, is going to be democratic, and is going to be inclusive. I cannot exclude anyone. I cannot really judge Mr. Bilhaj for standing up to a tyrant like Gaddafi. Actually, I applaud him and I respect him for what he did. And he paid a very high price when he was imprisoned by Gaddafi, and then he was released by Saif himself because he found out that he was a decent man, and therefore we cannot really exclude him. Libya is an inclusive country, and everyone has to take part in the building of this country in order to become democratic and competent.
Okay, everybody's got to take part, you say. Mr. Miles, what role for the tribes, however strong they are, when you've got NATO, you've got that NATO presence? Gaddafi, once again in his latest speech, raised up the issue of NATO, saying that this is a foreign invasion. I mean, that really hits a chord, doesn't it, that foreign invasion? That is one of the biggest fears in the region.
I agree with Farage that these problems are real. It's going to be a very difficult task that the NTC faces, but it's quite misleading to see it in terms of tribalism. What Libyans have said to me, and I believe them, is that tribalism is strong in Libya, at least in some areas, because it's a social force. People feel solidarity with their tribes. They know their position in a tribe. It gives them a feeling of identity, a feeling of solidarity. But it's not a political influence, or not to a great extent. There are, as a matter of fact, no real tribal leaders in Libya. I've worked in other Arab countries like Yemen, Jordan, Lebanon even, where every tribesman will tell you who his leader is. That's not the case in Libya.
But that makes it very different as well.
They're a social force.
It makes it very different to what's happening in Egypt and Tunisia, isn't it? I mean, Libya is one of the most tribal nations in the Arab world.
But I'm telling you that the tribal structure in Libya is more social than political. That may be because, as I said at the beginning of this discussion, they've had their leadership chopped off by Gaddafi and before that by Mussolini. I don't know the history, I don't know why it is so, but I believe it is so.
Okay.
They are a social force rather than a political one.
Let's go back to NATO. Do you think NATO will still play a sensitive role when it comes to sectarian sensitivities? I mean, have they learned a lesson from the mistakes made in Iraq, for example?
The situation is completely different. I think that what's going to happen now in Libya is going to be run by the Libyans. They're going to have to decide how to deal with questions, whether they're questions of tribalism or anything else. There isn't a continuing role for NATO in Libya after the fighting is over.
Mr. Barber, do you agree?
I think two things. First, as concerns NATO, we know that NATO from the beginning exceeded its mandate. We might applaud that it exceeded its mandate since they helped overthrow Gaddafi, and in the long term that's a good thing. But the fact is they far exceeded the mandate of protecting civilians. But more importantly, I think the emphasis, and perhaps Jane in your own commentary, focusing just on the tribes underestimates other divisions and fissures in Libya that also have to be dealt with. There is, for example, a serious racial element. We know that the Tuaregs and other Libyans of color in the south and in the desert, some of their workers have been mistreated. In Benghazi, some of the fighters who actually were with Gaddafi were seen as mercenaries when in fact they were Libyans of color. There's a fair amount of racial animosity now that has to be dealt with. We know that the Berber tribes in the Fusa Mountains, who really helped in this latest push from the mountains towards Tripoli, that they will truck no oppression or no governance from other places. They want a fair amount of autonomy. You wouldn't call them like the Kurds, but something like the Kurds, they certainly want their autonomy. So there are many forms of fissure and fracture there that have to be dealt with. And again, let me say, I'm totally in the spirit of our friend in Benghazi who wants to push towards unity. But we have to understand, looking historically at revolution, that revolutions succeed in overthrowing tyrannies, but they do not necessarily establish democracy. That is a much longer and slower process. And very often the disappearance of a strong man, as we saw when the Bourbons were overthrown in Paris in 1789, or the Tsar was overthrown in Russia in 1917, leads not to democracy, but to fractionalism, and in time to a new strongman. In Paris, it led to Napoleon and the restoration of the monarchy.
Okay, but
in Russia,
can I just jump in here quickly?
A new, and we just have to be careful of that. We have to look for that. If people go in blind and say it's all beautiful, we're all united, it's going to be easy now that Gaddafi's gone, I think they're asking for trouble down the line.
Okay, let's look at the NTC and the makeup of the NTC. It seems to have a good tribal cultural mix. Doesn't that bode well, therefore, for the country?
It bodes very well today, but as they've already said in the Paris meetings this week, the Transitional Council is transitional. It will be changed and transformed as a new constitution and new elections and new parties are planned for. And the question is what happens down the line? Who among these people? Right now, nobody really knows who many of them are other than Jalil and Jabril, who actually worked in the Gaddafi government. But down the line, others will suddenly appear as strong. We don't know how strong Belhab will appear, who is now in charge of the Tripoli militias. We don't know how strong some of the other military and militia figures will become. And that's the question. And again, I say this not to discourage the road to democracy, but to say that if we are not aware of the challenges that are likely to be there and say there are no problems with the tribes, there are no problems with the Berbers, there are no racial problems in Libya, then one is vastly underestimating the road to democracy. And it's a hard road everywhere. We see already in Egypt and Tunisia even, where the Arab Spring has not yet culminated in a summertime. And in Libya, it will be even more difficult. That doesn't mean it's not possible, but please, folks, let's look realistically at the challenges that are there down the road, not today.
Sure.
But when the strong man is gone, when Gaddafi is gone.
Mr. Najm seems to agree with that. I mean, it makes you wonder who's going to hold the balance of power here, whether it is going to be in the hands of the military.
Well, I'm glad that Professor Barber has raised a number of issues. I take it they're genuine fears. And by the way, we've been thinking about this and we'll be contemplating this. Actually, we've been thinking of the worst. And the worst, thank God, did not happen. We thought that a massacre will take place in Tripoli or around Tripoli. We thought there will be revenge taking. There will be blood spilled in the streets. And this, you know, never materialized, never happened, which is good. I think Libyans realize that democracy isn't something that you can have tomorrow, something that has to be developed over years, and it's a culture that has to be cultivated, and we are aware of it. I think what we need right now is good governance, we need some transparency, and we need some stability, and this is what all Libyans agree upon. As for minorities, Amazigh, Berber, or Tuaregs, or whatever, I speak to them on a daily basis. Last night I was with some of them here, and they're very contented with what they have, and also they want it more. And Libyans are willing to give. I mean, I actually was advocate of rights to these minorities a long time ago when I was in London. I thought these people should be allowed to speak their language, should have a television of their own, should have their own newspapers, and that's what they have right now. And no one's complaining, no one is objecting to this. So
okay.
Libyans realize what challenges have, and they have taken them on.
Okay, so Mr. Miles, it seems that everyone is in some sort of agreement that tribes are incredibly important, but they're not detrimental to the situation at the moment. I suppose the issue now is how you reconcile parts of the nation that need to be reconciled. And what image do you think you'll be seeing in Libya in 5 years from now?
Well, I wish I knew. I mean, of course, I think everyone has to agree with Professor Barber that revolutions have a bad reputation. Terrible things have happened in France and in Russia after their revolutions, and in Iran, you might add. And we hope that they won't happen in Libya. But right now, we're looking at Libya and trying to consider the importance of the tribes. And I think Professor Barber's having it both ways. One moment he was telling us of demands among Berbers for autonomy, and the next moment he was telling us we don't know who any of these people are. Does he know any Berbers who are demanding autonomy? Personally, I don't.
Let's leave it there. Gentlemen, thank you all very much for talking to us from Benghazi. Faraj Najm, historian, author of Tribes, Islam and State in Libya. In Springfield, Benjamin Barber, distinguished fellow at the Policy Centre Demos and author of Jihad versus McWorld. And in Oxford, Oliver Miles, who's the former UK ambassador to Libya. That's all from the Inside Story team for now. So thank you for joining us. We'd really like to hear from you. Get your comments and your suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye.